Well, hi there, this is Jenny from the Sewing Palace, and today we're going to learn how to make a standard size pillowcase. I'm going to show you a couple of examples. This is one example. You'll need 3 fabrics. This will fit on your bed and they wash beautifully. We're going to learn how to do a French seam. Here's an accent for that. And this is the pillowcase we'll be working on in class today. To get started, the fabric supplies that you'll need will be an accent strip of fabric that is cut 2 inches and then pressed in half, wrong sides together, lengthwise. So you'll end up with a 1-inch wide strip with a fold on one side and a raw edge on the other. You will leave the selvage on each end. The other piece that you need is a 1/4 yard. This will be the cuff of the fabric. Then for the main fabric, you'll need 3/4 yard. Again, you will leave the selvage on these pieces. The other supplies that you'll need are either wonder clips or pins because you need to hold all the layers together. The wonder clips work great when you're using these, and you want to, when you clip them, there is a flat side and a curved side. The flat side goes on the bed of the machine. The other supplies that you'll need will be a rotary mat, a rotary ruler, and then a rotary cutter that is nice and sharp. When you're cutting these pieces after you've purchased them at the fabric store, you want to make sure that they're nice and even from the fold. And you will line it up so that you have the fold closest to you and along a line. Make sure that it's nice and flat all the way up to the selvage. So this fold should be nice and even. You will then cut on the left side and get it square using the fold as your guide. So you'll get this first edge nice and even using your rotary cutter. You can use the fold as your guide, lining up the marks on the ruler so that you know that you're cutting nice and straight from the fold. I've already cut this piece, so there's not much left, but I just wanted to ensure that you're cutting it nice and even from the fold. You'll then count over 9 inches and then use the other side, again from the fold, and measuring 9 inches and cutting this other side. You will leave the selvage on the end, don't trim it off yet, and you'll do the same with the 3/4 yard piece, which is your main fabric, lining up the fold along the bottom of a line, squaring up the left side, and then measuring over 27 inches from that mark that you've squared up from. Here's the fold, you'll square it up and then measure over 27 inches. If you're making a king-size pillowcase, this main piece will be measured at 36 inches. We will sew 3 pieces together and they will look like this. So you will have one big long piece and the selvages will still be on the end of the fabric. They won't line up perfectly, and we'll learn how to do a French seam on this final seam to make it look nice and professional and launder beautifully. So step 1, I have my cuff. This is the 9-inch strip. I am laying it right side up. The selvages are on the side. I have left the selvages on. And the center fold is right here in the middle. Next, I'm going to lay down my accent piece, which was the 2-inch strip. It is pressed in half lengthwise. Again, the selvages are still left on this piece. And I'm laying it right side touching, raw edges lining up, aligning that center fold. And depending on the brand of fabric that you have, the ends might not line up. So as you can see, my orange is a little bit longer than the black piece on the bottom. And then I'm going to lay my 3/4 yard piece that is my main piece right side down. Again, lining up that center fold. Now you really want to take your time, you've got multiple layers here, and line up that center fold of all pieces, and you're going to clip all along here, making sure that all those pieces are even Steven along the edge. that all those layers are clipped, you can baste them if you'd like with an 1/8 inch seam, or if you're feeling confident, you can then take this main piece and you're gonna accordion fold it back and forth so that it is small. So you're just gonna take that, so this is the other end, and just kind of accordion folding it back and forth so it's nice and small. So it's now fitting within this cuff piece. And then next, after that's all flat, you'll take this and flip it over and clip it to those layers, making sure not to get this tucked into that clip. You're going to sew all along this edge with a 1/4 inch seam. You want to make sure that that last end of the main piece is tucked out of the way, which you did when you clipped it. So it'll be the cuff, the 2 pieces of the accent, and then the main piece, and then the cuff again. This is what is considered the burrito method. You've wrapped all the fabric up inside of this tube, and you'll sew with a 1/4 inch seam, making sure to catch all the layers. Once you've stitched a 1/4 inch seam along this edge, you will then pull all the fabric through the end of the burrito. After the cuff is pulled through, you will then go to the ironing board and spend a fair amount of time pressing this so that it lays flat. The main piece you want to press and kind of pull out. The accent piece you'll press down, and then the other side of the cuff you'll press away. On the opposite side, you want to make sure and get this pulled up and away. So you'll spend a fair amount of time over at the ironing board getting it all flat. Once this is all pressed and laying flat, you can then top stitch right along through the accent fabric so that this flap doesn't move around. It's entirely up to you. It still functions if you don't stitch it down. This one is not stitched down and has been laundered several times, but it does flip up, or if you want it to stay down, the next step would be top stitching it down. I'm going to use gray thread, and I'm going to sew right along the edge of the orange fabric, top stitching it down. Now that I have my 3 pieces sewn together and top stitch, I'm going to cut off the selvage. So I will fold the piece in half, aligning this top cuff so that they're on top of each other, and then smooth it out from there. So I'll take some time smoothing this out and work my way all the way down the fabric. Don't hesitate if this is not lining up, because that's what we're squaring up at this point. You do want to make sure that your pillowcase is laying nice and flat, and then it's going to be so long it's not going to fit on your ruler. So then you're going to fold it up, and I usually fold it up so that I can see just a little bit of the cuff. So I fold it up the bottom up to the cuff. Then I'm going to slide it so you can see on camera, and I'm just smoothing all this surface out. And then I'm going to use the mat as my guide because I want to square it up so that it's nice and even. So I'm looking at the bottom of the fabric. Here, I'll move it up so you can see that. I'm looking at the bottom of the fabric and lining it up with this fold along a line so I know it's nice and square. And then I'm going to ship this down so you can see the top. I'm doing the same thing from the top, making sure that this is nice and even along the measurements on the mat. Now, I don't do measuring from this point on the width of the pillow. I find if I just cut off the selvage to the minimum amount, then it is just fine by me. You can measure. You want about 22 and a half inches from this left side fold. I'm taking my time. I'm looking both on the top and the bottom. And then I'm just going to look under here and make sure, am I catching all that selvage? It looks like I have to move in just a little bit because this bottom cuff is inside just a little bit. So I'm Yes, I'm cutting through a lot of layers, so I do need to apply a fair amount of pressure on the ruler. I'm hanging my pinky off the edge so I can feel if it slips. I'm checking that I'm square both top and bottom, and then cutting through all of the layers. And then I'll just flip this over to double check and make sure I got everything. I can see there's a little tiny blip when I went over the multiple layers. So I'm just gonna lay this down and make sure that that's nice and even. So just that little bit trimmed off. Now we're ready to start our French seam. They are laying wrong sides together. It feels a little counterintuitive, but on a French seam, you're gonna first sew the first seam wrong sides together. So that's why I folded it the way that I did, so that it is ready to sew. I'm gonna clip all along this edge, and my first seam allowance is gonna be 1/8 of an inch. Again, if you don't wanna use clips, you could use pins, and you're gonna clip the whole length of this pillow. So just in review, I have it all clipped all along the side, and then I moved all the way down to the very bottom, and I've clipped all the way across, making sure that these layers are all aligned and even. Here is the top of my cuff. It is important to start here so that you can make sure that that top fold is laying right on top of each other. And what you're going to do is you're going to use a skinny foot. In this case, I'm using a 1/4 of an inch presser foot. The inside toe of this foot is 1/8 of an inch. So with a French seam, you do a small seam and then a larger seam to encompass it. So you could do 1/4 1/2 or 1/8 and then 1/4. My choice is 1/8 and then 1/4. So I'm going to use the inside toe, and I'm going to sew along that cuff, securing my stitches, and then sewing forward using that inside toe. I'm coming down to that corner, so I'm going to go all the way down to the end and stop 1/8 of an inch away from the edge, which is just about one more stitch. I'm sinking the needle down, and then I'm going to pivot and sew all the way across to the fold. Now that edge is all stitched with 1/8 of an inch seam. I do have a couple little threads that are dangling off, and it's best to clean these up, otherwise they'll get encased in the seam and stick out. Now I've sewn that 1/8 of an inch seam. Here's the top of my cuff right here, and all the way down to this corner, pivoted and went down to the fold. Now I'm going to turn it inside out actually. I've turned the pillowcase inside out and taken a fair amount of time pressing, because this is going to be the final seam of my French seam. This was where we sewed the 1/8 of an inch and then pressed it so it's nice and flat, and then I took it to the ironing board and I pressed it so that the crease is right on the edge and nice and straight. We'll then sew along this edge with a larger seam, which is 1/4 of an inch. We started with 1/8, and we'll make it a little bit bigger at 1/4 of an inch, and it will encompass that seam. Getting ready to start my French seam, I'm going to use the edge of my foot as the guide. And sometimes when you sew on multiple layers, there's a little bit of a bump here. So I'm going to come inside that seam first instead of starting right on the edge. And I'm about 1/4 of an inch in from the edge, so I'll go forward, but then I'll go backwards to go catch that, and it has a better time going over those bumps. Right here, you're going to have a bit of a bump, so you might need to provide some assistance getting it up and over. This Bernina has great power, so it's going to go right through. I'm just going to sew all the way down using the edge of my foot as the guide for 1/4 of an inch seam. If you look closely, I have a tiny bit of fabric hanging off, which means it's a chubby 1/4 of an inch. I'm approaching the corner. Ideally, you would want this corner popped out completely, so I'm just going to use a little straight edge and try to get that corner popped out a little better. And I'm going to stop 1/4 inch from the new edge, so I'll sew up to it and then pivot with my needle sunk in the fabric. If you'd like to secure this, you can always go reverse and then go back to that pivot point and then pivot and do the same thing. Go forwards and reverse. I'm approaching this fold that was in our fabric, so I'm just going to sew right to the corner and secure my stitch. I also have a little bit of a tuck here, so I'm going to help pull that corner out so it's square. All right, you have your pillowcase all sewn. We did the French seam on this one side. And the beauty of a French seam, when this is the inside of the pillow, you'll see it's nice and finished. The whole seam is encompassed, so there's no fraying. And here is the other side. So this will wash beautifully. I'm just going to turn it right side out because that's the fun part. Again, if we were doing a king size pillowcase, we would have done the main fabric at 36 inches, which is a yard. And this is a standard pillowcase, so we did it the main fabric at 27, the cuff at 2 inches. Sorry, the cuff at 9 inches, and the little accent was 2 inches. Those stay the same if you're doing the king size pillowcase. So here we are, right side out. Thanks for joining me today and learning how to make a standard size pillowcase. This is Jenny from the Sewing Palace. Bye-bye.